Welcome back. All right, so on the board here, we've got pending unrestricted free agents. We know at the trade deadline, lots of rentals take place, and we're 11 days away from the trade deadline. So I figured now's a good time to take an updated look on where players are at in terms of scoring. So I've got the top 11 scorers amongst pending unrestricted free agents. Top three goaltenders in terms of wins, although I put their save percentage on the board. I've got everybody's cap hit on the board as well. I've got some notables here, which are definitely worth discussing. And then we'll get into some teams that have a ton of cap space because of how the whole cap space things works. And cap space thing works. And I will do my best to explain it, even though when I look at the numbers, it kind of, scanners. Anyways, Mitch Marner's at the top of the board amongst UFAs. And the question of how much money he should get and for how long will be discussed plenty between now and July the 1st. 56 games played with Toronto this year, 16 goals, 55 assists, 71 points. The core four, the core four, the core four. Two of the core four have contracts that are expiring, and I think Marner probably stays. And how much is that going to cost? Well, the $10.9 million cap hit, which is high because you've got all four of them signed to high cap hits. I actually think a raise is highly likely, and it's warranted. Marner's an excellent forward, and unless there's some catastrophic, sweep, if they get swept in the first round in Toronto, maybe we see some big change. But outside of that, I don't know that that's necessarily been coming or is coming. And we've been talking about that for years. Now, Mikko Rantanen's an interesting one. In Carolina, he hasn't been there that long yet. It does take a while for some players to really and truly fit in. But the concern around Carolina would be you lost Gensel. You don't want to lose Rantanen the same way for nothing. 56 games played by Rantanen, 26 goals, 41 assists, 67 points. His cap hit currently $9.25 million. The reality is that Mikko Rantanen is a very good forward. He's a premier forward. But how good is he going to be without Nathan MacKinnon? That is a valid question to ask. It's a valid question to ask how many of the goals that he had were set up by MacKinnon, and will that work? Will it work in Carolina? Is it worth that $14 million a year price tag that he's looking for? That's the cap hit that's been rumored. In Carolina, apparently he's got an offer that's over the $100 million mark altogether, and that's just been sitting there for now. So Rantanen's going to be really pricey. I think there's a ton of potential pitfalls with that, so we'll see what happens. Rantanen's a very good forward. I do think there's the potential for him to be overpaid with this free agent market being as crazy as it could be with the cap going up so high. Matt Duchene, very team-friendly cap hit of $3 million. 57 games, 23 goals, 26 assists, 59 points. Dallas won't trade Duchene. Duchene is going to do, I think, the same thing that Pavelski did, which is every summer he'll decide if he wants to come back again. And I would think that with the way he's performed for Dallas, we might actually see maybe a 2-year extension for him this summer. And he has definitely, he's definitely garnered enough attention and done enough that I would say a raise is in order. Mikael Granlund, 58 games, 15 goals, 34 assists, 49 points, $5 million cap hit for Granlund. So when Mikael Granlund was picked up by Dallas, I thought that was a really good move. I see this as a pure rental, though. I'd be very surprised if Dallas puts up a big money contract for Granlund, which, with the cap going up this summer, players have every right to demand. Granlund very likely just a pure rental. There are a lot of good young players in Dallas, and Ben's on an expiring contract as well, so you want to have as much cap flexibility as you possibly can have this summer and beyond, because there are some really good players in Dallas that are going to require a ton of money. Wyatt Johnston is going to require a ton of money to keep in Dallas. Nikolai Ehlers, 48 games, 18 goals, 31 assists, 49 points. His cap hit of $6 million is a ridiculous, absolutely just low amount, which is weird because at the time he signed it, it was seen as decent. But because of the way that contracts have been going, Ehlers is a huge bargain right now. And I would think this summer, if he wants $10 million, he should get it. I think he's worth that. Now, the Winnipeg Jets, they have some guys on long-term contracts now. I haven't seen anything about Ehlers potentially being traded, and with where Winnipeg is in the standings, why would you? But there is the question to be asked of, so after the season's done, if they don't have him signed by, say, the draft, if it doesn't look like it's going to happen, will we see Ehlers' rights getting exchanged at that point? Nick Ehlers is going to generate a lot of interest on the market should he get there July the 1st, and easily easily could pass the $10 million cap hit just because teams could get into a bidding war for Ehlers. John Tavares, 50 games, 22 goals, 26 assists, 48 points, an $11 million cap hit. I would not be surprised to see Tavares stay in Toronto on a lower cap hit. I could see him coming back for half that, for like $5.5 million a year, and retire as a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's been no indication the team wants to move the player, no indication the player wants to get moved. Everything I've seen tells me Tavares is sticking around, and we can have that debate about Toronto and keeping the core four together and how bad that looks if they never win a Stanley Cup, but I don't see any reason to think that Marner or Tavares are going to be on their way out. Sometimes I think players, or sometimes I think fans want to see a trade involving the players just to see something change. And sometimes with Toronto, I think that's part of it. Toronto, it's a matter of they get their depth scoring going and their defense keeps things together in the playoffs. They could surprise people. Boston, I talked about Marchand this morning, so we're going to talk about Marchand briefly here. 58 games, 20 goals, 25 assists, 45 points. He has a cap hit of $6.125 million. That is a very bargain level contract for Marchand. Marchand, I don't think is ever going to get back to that points per game plus range, but he's a good defensive forward. He is the team captain. I would be shocked to see him get moved by the Bruins. He has said that, trade talk is out there. You got to kind of, just close that out. He will have some say. In the event that the Boston Bruins decide to make a move, he will have all the say in the world. I've also seen people say, couldn't they trade him and then re-sign him July the 1st? They could. I know the NHL isn't a huge fan of that kind of thing, but you can. You can definitely go back. The thing is, it very rarely happens. We've seen players get moved and, they'll probably sign back, and then they don't. Sometimes they just get an offer from another team that's so ridiculous. They're like, I'll take that one. That's crazy money. Jason Zucker, 53 games, 18 goals, 26 assists, 44 points, $5 million cap hit. I don't think he's in Buffalo at the deadline. I think they trade him between now and Friday. Zucker's had a good season, and teams need goal scoring. One thing that I've noticed looking at depth charts is how many teams could really use a top six winger. And I'm talking like some top teams that when they show at the start of the game, here's your line combinations, and I'm like, wow, that guy's on the top two lines? Huh. That team needs a top six winger. And I've been thinking that a lot lately. And so Jason Zucker is going to be a good fit for somebody. I think Buffalo's going to do well. I think with this draft being perceived as being a bit of a weaker draft, I think they could turn him into a first-round draft pick. Not a top 10 first-round draft pick, but a first-round draft pick nonetheless. And every draft that people say is bad always has diamonds in the rough. Always. Always. That's the way it is. That's why when people are so cavalier about, we don't care about first-round draft picks. You should, because there's always going to be those players who end up being pretty good from any draft. Jacob Chychrun is not getting moved. I want to make this clear. It's not going to happen. 52 games, 17 goals, 22 assists, 39 points. Absolutely ridiculous season. And what a time to have that season in a career year, and it's a contract year. His contract, his cap hit, currently $4.6 million. He is going to get more than that. The question becomes, how much do the Caps offer? Does he give the Caps maybe a little bit of a discount off of what he wanted otherwise because he wants to stay in Washington? Clearly, this is a relationship that works really well. Chychrun is a player that has had injury issues in the past, but this season, not really a problem. He has played 52 of the Capitals games. He's been just lights out, especially over the weekend. I think he had 3 goals over the weekend, so not bad for a defenseman. Kyle Palmieri, I talked about him in a video not too long ago. 56 games, 17 goals, 21 assists, 38 points. His cap hits $5 million. In the event that the Islanders decide to move the player, that would be if they're not in the hunt for a playoff spot, that they would make that decision, you would think. And Palmieri would attract some interest. And then I could see Lou bringing him back on July the 1st. It's what Lou does. Lou has his favorite players, and for all the detractors I've seen with Lou, I will hand it to him. He is loyal to certain players. He really does like his players. Ryan Donato, 55 games, 19 goals, 19 assists, 38 points. He has a $2 million cap hit. I'm surprised Donato's still in Chicago now, to be honest. Once again, going back to how there are teams that need some scoring, Donato with 19 goals. I don't expect he would have scored those 19 goals for a team with more depth than what Chicago has. So you gotta take your expectations and lower them at least a little bit around Donato. Don't get too enamored with the 19 goals in 55 games, but at that cap hit, That's decent. Donato is a good forward. I've liked Donato for a long time. He has at times found himself outside the lineup for whatever team he's playing for, but he's done well in Chicago. And I will say this, would I be completely surprised if Chicago just re-signed him and kept him? No, they've done that with other players. So maybe. We'll see what happens with Donato. And then there's 3 goaltenders on the board, so let's go and get into it. Adin Hill, 903 save percentage, $4.9 million cap hit. He's not going anywhere. I want to make this clear that just because I've got the pending UFAs on the board doesn't necessarily mean I'm saying there's going to be a move. But with Vegas, it's interesting because Samsonov, 897 save percentage, $1.8 million cap hit. With Hill and Samsonov, do we actually believe that Vegas is done? I'm going to say no. And I'm wearing a Vegas jersey because it feels like last year I went, well, Vegas isn't going to make any big moves. And then they got Hurdle and they got Hanifin. So I am not going to take that step again. I'm going to take the step back and say, no, Vegas will absolutely make a big move because they always do. And maybe they go out and look for a goaltender. Notice there's one sandwiched in between in Karl Vejmelka. Now, for Utah to make the playoffs, they'd have to have Vejmelka in net. Utah right now is in that land where they're not quite that close to a playoff spot, but they're close enough that if they decide not to sell at the deadline and say we believe in these guys, that'd be understandable. But they're also far away enough that between now and next Friday, if they have some struggles, you could justify moving Vejmelka, who's at the end of his contract, and that $2.725 million cap hit is pretty easy to absorb at this time of year by a team. So Vejmelka might be one to keep an eye on. We know that he can play he can raise his game. So if you had, say, Adin Hill and Karl Vejmelka in Vegas, I'm just saying, right? So we'll see if Utah's still in the hunt by next Friday and if a move takes place there. They do have Ingram in Utah to go to the end of the season. Vejmelka's 28. So I don't think that if they move Vejmelka, it's disastrous for Utah. And there can be moves made this summer as well when it comes to goaltending. So it's just one to keep an eye on because I think if they put Vejmelka on the market, I think there'd be a lot of teams calling. John Gibson's not on the board, but I think Gibson being moved would make some sense. He's got to be healthy first, though. So some others to discuss here. Sam Bennett. Sam Bennett was rumored to be on his way to signing a contract. Wasn't that in November that they were talking about how he was going to sign an extension? It hasn't happened yet. And there's more and more discussion about whether or not Bennett is still going to be with Florida next season. Bennett, I cannot see them trading Sam Bennett, though, before the trade deadline. That would be an absolute shocker because we know what Bennett means to them come playoff time. So you're not going to trade him before the playoffs. You're going to treat him like he's your own rental. If you're not able to come to any kind of an extension agreement with him, trading Bennett wouldn't make any sense. Brock Boeser, probably done. And it's interesting, too, because for all of the discussions about Boeser and then all the discussions about Pettersson, everything else, if the Canucks moved all those players, you were looking at the team at least going into a retool, if not a full-on rebuild. I'm not a huge fan of that personally because we've really, when did the Canucks finish? Anyway, outside of making the playoffs last season, and last season's first place finish by the Canucks was largely spurred by a ridiculously fortunate and just really a first half of the season last year where everything bounced their way. And I think it raised expectations too high. So I would be surprised if Boeser is still a Canuck after the trade deadline. Based on how this weekend they lost 2 games. They only scored 1 goal in both games. They're definitely trending in the wrong direction. We can have the coaching discussion another time. We'll talk about the coaching another time. But Brock Boeser probably on his way out. I would be surprised if it's not Minnesota, to be honest. Minnesota's the team that's been rumored for years around Boeser. So if it ends up being a Minnesota Wild trade, then that makes me a Minnesota Wild fan right on the spot. Just saying, Brock Boeser, I love the guy's game, and I will root for him wherever he may go. All right, Brock Nelson. So take what I said about Kyle Palmieri. You can say almost the same thing with Brock Nelson. Good player, veteran player. And could I see them moving him at the deadline? It depends on how close they are to the actual playoff line, and it depends on what Lou Lamoriello's vision is for the future for this team. And it will be interesting to see with Lou, because at this point in time in his life, he's going to have to transition the job to somebody else at some point. And so it'll be interesting to see what the Islanders do after Lou Lamoriello's time is done, and whether they keep following this path, because he likes older players. He likes the familiarity with players and just bringing guys back that he already knows. And it's worked pretty well for getting the Islanders into the playoffs, to be honest. Jake Evans. I will say the same thing I said the last time I mentioned Jake Evans in a video like this. I think he's having the best season of his career. I think the Montreal Canadiens should hold on to him. I'd be very surprised if he gets moved. But just going down that rabbit hole now that Montreal's kind of fallen back out of that chase for that final playoff spot, Evans could attract a pretty hefty return. At this point in time, I think he could. I think he's had a really good season, and I think everybody knows it. If it's just like a mid-round pick, if it's just a mid-round pick and a B-level prospect a team's offering for Evans, you hang up the phone. But if it's a top return, maybe they listen. And I'm not saying that as anybody who thinks they should trade Evans. I think you don't trade Evans unless the offer that's being made to you is one that you know you're winning. Where you're like, okay, that's a fantastic return for Jake Evans. We'll take that. Brandon Tanev. I do think Tanev gets moved, and I think Seattle will probably get good value here. If Toronto doesn't call about Brandon Tanev, I'll be very disappointed in them, because I'd love to see the Tanev brothers playing together in the National Hockey League. I've advocated for that as far back as when Chris Tanev was in Vancouver. I wanted Brandon Tanev in Vancouver. It didn't happen. And to this point, I don't think they've ever played together. So I'd like to see that, and we'll see if that ends up taking shape. Also, Tanev's a very good defensive forward. You have him play with his brother. I think that could be a lot of fun. Matt Grzelcyk. So Matt Grzelcyk got hurt on Saturday. I haven't seen an update. Or no, he got hurt yesterday on Sunday against the Rangers. I haven't seen an update yet today. Grzelcyk's having a career season offensively. It'd be a big blow to the trade deadline for Pittsburgh if Grzelcyk is hurt for any extended period of time, and if that hurts their ability to get a return on a trade. Pittsburgh's not in the hunt for a playoff spot. It would make total sense to trade Grzelcyk, and with there not being a lot of top four defensemen seemingly available at this deadline, Grzelcyk would probably attract a pretty healthy return. Probably not too dissimilar from what they got from Marcus Pettersson from the Vancouver Canucks. So the trade deadline's in 11 days. So which teams have a bunch of cap space? Because we're going to see teams, the three-way trades to, make sure that teams are staying under the cap and all that fun stuff. So according to Puckpedia, currently, the Columbus Blue Jackets have $69.34 million in cap space. So the way this works, because it's something I've been seeing on their site lately, and it's really kind of broken my brain a little bit. The cap charge drops as the season plays out. So what that means is that if a team has $500,000 in cap space, and if you've reached the halfway mark of the year, now they can add a $1 million contract because half of that contract's been paid. So they're only adding a charge of $500,000 to the books. So that means that Columbus has a ton of cap space, and they had a ton of cap space coming into this season anyways. Was over $19 million they had in cap space. Calgary, $64.87 million. So what's interesting with this is both Columbus and Calgary are still in the hunt for a playoff spot. They could be a huge player at this deadline and could add any of the players on this board without any concern. That they could just pick somebody up. So like Columbus could pick up Jason Zucker, give him a draft pick, and they don't have to worry about cap space at all. They've added a top six forward. They can then turn around and pick up Paul Mary. There's another top six forward. And all of a sudden, Columbus, a team that doesn't struggle to score goals anyways, has more goal scoring. They could also throw a pretty good package towards Utah for Vejmelka if they were in the market for another goaltender and say, you know what, Elvis has had a good bounce back season, but Vejmelka we think is a good goaltender too. And then maybe Tarasov goes to Utah. Maybe it's Greaves that goes to Utah. Something fun like that, right? And then you've got Anaheim at $62 million. Anaheim, of course, seemingly better lately than what we might have expected in terms of their record, but we'll see how long that lasts. San Jose, $26.02 million in cap space. Currently, this is the current cap space. Nashville, $24.01 million. Buffalo, $23.16 million. And Utah, $21.45 million. So these are the teams to keep an eye on over the next 11 days who may very well be used as brokers in a deal or deals for teams that are looking to add players and don't have the cap space to do it, just with the straight trade with another team. So you need a third party to take on some of that money and you'll probably throw a third or a fourth or a fifth round draft pick at a team to do that, it's going to be an interesting trade deadline. So it's been quiet. I was actually kind of surprised. I figured during the Four Nations break we would see some decent trades. We didn't. So now we're getting close to it. And coming out of this weekend, we had 24 games on the weekend. Some general managers should have an idea of what they need and what they don't. And we're getting closer and closer to teams having to make a decision. I would think that before Friday, the 7th of March, we will see some big moves being made. And I'll be here to talk about it when those moves happen. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Which pending UFA are you most excited to see what happens with them at the deadline? What do you think is going to happen with these guys here, as well as these ones over here? And how do you guys feel about the accrued cap space at $69.34 million? It's insane, isn't it? But it makes some sense because the contract's already been partly paid out, so you don't have that entire cap hit. There you go. But let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I will talk to you again soon.